somebody's been watching Braveheart. You know, it's interesting. Just yesterday, we were talking about the difference between an homage and a ripoff. And I think that The Birth of a Nation is a fantastic example of an homage to Mel Gibson's Braveheart. It veers a little bit towards a ripoff at the very end of the movie with the last scene where you're like, I've seen this before. Braveheart! And then you instantly realize that was Nate Parker's inspiration for this film. I would bet that he studied it very carefully, and I think he did a darn good job making the American slavery version of Braveheart. And I mean that in the highest possible compliment, and all that implies in terms of quality and epicness, etc. But I would like to say that even though the final scene in the film borrows maybe a little bit too much from Braveheart, I have to give Nate Parker credit in that he puts his own twist on the end of it, and the final seconds of the film are probably some of the most powerful that I've ever seen, ever, in any movie of all time. I mean, Nate Parker has some really good creative ideas. And I was really surprised because there have been a lot of comparisons made between Nate Parker and Mel Gibson in the industry press, you know, the trades, because both of them are marred with scandal, but yet are asking moviegoers and the media and awards voters to look past their personal scandals at their professional work. Mel Gibson with Hacksaw Ridge and Nate Parker with The Birth of a Nation. But even beyond the scandals, the two men, and I know that some of you feel their scandals are wildly different, but I'm talking, you know, I think obviously you can see that they're kind of in the same boat this award season. But anyway, they're very similar even beyond that unfortunate parallel in terms of their talent in front of and behind the camera, their charisma, and also their ability to depict violence. There's a very similar quality to Nate Parker's depiction of violence here. Although I will say he never sensationalizes it, just like I think Mel Gibson has never sensationalized it. And there were some scenes in this movie that reminded me not of Braveheart, but of another film that Mel Gibson did. So maybe Nate Parker took a master class in Mel Gibson's filmography. Not a waste of anyone's time, by the way. Mel Gibson is a fantastic filmmaker, and that's The Passion of the Christ, which had some of the most brutal sequences I've ever seen. I was bawling during Passion of the Christ, and I have to say I cried quite a bit during this movie as well. And The Passion of the Christ really spoke to me personally because it crystallized Jesus taking all of this hate upon himself, human hate and cruelty and lack of empathy, and why he wanted to prove the importance of turn the other cheek. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it really, you know, I'll never forget that experience. And I feel that The Birth of a Nation does the same thing in regards to discrimination, racism, misogyny, homophobia. It runs the whole gamut, and making sure that you realize that everybody, like every human being, is worthy of respect and empathy, and no one's better than anyone else. And I think it's ironic that Nate Parker, at the very least, was misogynistic towards this woman early on in his life when he was in college. You know, no matter what actually went down, you know, we can agree, because Nate Parker has admitted it, that he didn't treat her as he should have. And that is what's taking down a very, very powerful and well-made film with an incredibly important message, the exact same thing that it's speaking out against. And I would also say that makes The Birth of a Nation, and you know, there's many things to take away from this movie, but one that I'm sure Nate Parker never intended while making it is that it is a very striking lesson in that you really need to be careful in what you do in life, because there are some things that you won't be able to get past. You know, the rest of society, or a large enough portion of society, just isn't going to forgive you. And I think that's what Nate Parker is dealing with right now, even when you make an amazing movie. Now, another problem with this film, and you know, the film itself has no problems. I really applaud its ability to look at this situation, slavery, so unflinchingly, and we'll talk about that. But there are problems that spin out of it, because it's just such a nerve that Nate Parker has just like not only touched, but just like grabbed hold of with both hands. And I worry about inciting violence today. I'm genuinely concerned about people's safety going to see this movie, or even when the movie comes out from people who've seen it, because it's pulling back the curtain on what I think is undeniably, especially after you see this film, the American Holocaust. And when you watch this, you realize that this was going on for decades and no one did anything about it, right? Like, the North was like, we're against slavery. We don't do that here. But why didn't you stop it earlier, right? It's incredible that these things were going on and that people just turned a blind eye. But then you think of what's going on today with Black Lives Matter, and there are definite shades of that in this movie. But that even gun control, and that people, society just doesn't do anything about it. And it's really tragic. And I think that this movie also hopefully would inspire people to realize that, somebody has to do something before it's too late, as is the situation that happens in this movie. I also feel that I have my notes here. This is a very delicate conversation. I want to make sure I get it right. I would also say that it would have maybe been a better idea to make this movie available for people to watch at home, and not to see it on the big screen. I don't think it needs a really big screen, and I think that people would benefit not only from a safety angle, but from not potentially being swept up in a mob mentality, right? Like, I think this movie is such a nerve, and deals with so many things that are going to get really emotional reactions from anyone watching it, that I think it would benefit people to have the time to sit and think about it and digest it, instead of maybe going with their knee-jerk reactions. Because I want to remind everybody that today we've had our first black president that a majority of the millions of white people who live in the United States voted for. Also, a black man can start a movement just by taking a knee. And then also, when I left the screening, it was really an incredible moment, because I was still just reeling from what I'd seen, and so many of the revelations that had been put out before me. It was just, it was horrible. It was powerful stuff. And the press screening was in Times Square, and the billboard that was right in front of me when I came out was for Kevin Hart's upcoming movie. And Kevin Hart's standing there, the star of his movie. He's in a tux, standing next to a sports car, because it's like part of it's a James Bond spoof. And, it was just the lights of Times Square were shining on it. And it was really striking, particularly having watched what I just did about how black people were treated during slavery. So a lot's changed. Obviously, there are still a lot of problems, as we can see evidenced by all the horrible videos that we've seen lately in the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think it's important to realize that things have improved. And the reason I temper this review with that is because, I don't know if you've seen that, but in New York City, there have been stories about some people, because some black people are so upset about what's going on, they're just randomly beating up white people, pushing elderly white people downstairs, beating up a young white guy waiting for the subway with brass knuckles, again, just because they were white. And so I would say that defending yourself is admirable, but attacking someone for their skin color, even if that skin color is white, is a racist act. And part of me was like, well, maybe Nate Parker should have come on the screen after this movie, although I wouldn't advise it, because he would dilute such an incredibly powerful moment at the end. But in some ways say, well, please realize that, Nat Turner was heroic in some ways, but, this was an unusual situation, et cetera, et cetera. But I was like, Braveheart didn't have to have anything to write off the violence in that movie, in that rebellion. So why should The Birth of a Nation? But I think that, obviously Braveheart was very removed from how people are feeling currently, or were feeling currently at the time of that movie's release, whereas this film is like right in the middle of it. I'd also say that the movie, unfortunately depicts good and evil as black and white. And that's obviously not the case today. Nate Parker himself is married to a white woman, so he doesn't hate white people. But at that time in the South, it's a really complex situation, but yet at the same time it shouldn't be, right? When you're watching the movie, you're like, we should end this. But it's just, I would say that one of the things that's the most impressive about this film is that I don't think that we've ever seen such an unflinching look at what slavery truly was. And I think that's because this is the first time that a black filmmaker has approached the material, who's, again, American, not only American, but from Virginia. Nate Parker is from the exact same area where Nat Turner's rebellion occurred. And I want to compare this to 12 Years a Slave, the big Oscar-winning slave movie from a few years ago. And it's too bad they didn't know this movie was coming down the pipeline, but we'll talk about some of the problems I think this movie will have with awards season in just a moment. But in 12 Years a Slave, you had a British black director and actor heading that up, and they depicted slave owners as these plantation owners, and Benedict Cumberbatch was like super reluctant to own slaves. He's like, oh, I'm really against this, but I have no choice, but I'm reluctant the whole way through. And then Michael Fassbender is like, sure, I raped Lupita Nyong'o, but it's because I'm in love with her. Really, I think we've had such a PG version of slavery. Kind of like when Bill O'Reilly recently said, hey, so what if the slaves built the White House? They got free food and a roof over their head. And I would urge people who feel that way about slavery to watch this movie. And even if you realize how horrible slavery was, I think that for many of us, myself included, some things just didn't occur to you because they're so horrible. For instance, one of the things that this movie points out is that anyone could buy a slave in the South. And that I was like, man, how did I not think of that? And it's just such a terrible thing to realize that anyone could buy a slave, just one. And that's like your personal plaything. And that's just so horrible. When you think of the things that happen today, like those men who are abducting women and making them sex slaves in their basement, if it happened today, of course it happened then, especially when all of, the large society in large part in that region condoned it. So it's just absolutely terrifying and horrifying to watch. And I would say that I would hope that what people took away from this movie going forward are two things. And that one is, again, that you should respect all humans and have empathy for them, and that no group is better than another, more evolved. And that second, prejudice and hate will eventually burn everything to the ground. That said, I think this movie does a very good job of justifying Nat Turner deciding to go violent at the end. They really walk you through that decision where you're like, okay, I understand. But I think it's important to also understand that Nat Turner had no other choices. And today, there are lots of choices that, like look with, the whole situation that's happening in sports. However, I would also say this movie underscores the importance to make sure that choices remain for everyone, because any group, when cornered, left with nothing to lose, the results obviously are explosive and horrifying. As for whether or not this movie will do well during awards season, it's unfortunate, I think, because of what Nate Parker is accused of, and at the very least did in terms of how he treated this woman. A lot of people won't even watch the film to begin with, especially the older white voters that make up still the majority of the votership, at least in the Academy. It might do better with the Golden Globes, because that's just the Hollywood Foreign Press Association voting. But I think also it's going to be hard for a lot of people, particularly Americans, to watch this movie. It is being forced to take a look in the mirror, and it's really brutal. I mean, I was like, whew, thank goodness my relatives weren't here at this time. They came over from Austria and Czechoslovakia much later. Whew! But I think that in certain regions in particular, this movie will be very difficult for anyone to watch and admit. I mean, everyone talks about the Holocaust and what the Nazis did, but yet no one's really willing to talk about what happened in the South, on both sides, right? I mean, at least this conversation is getting started. But this is going to be a very controversial film, and a lot of people just simply will not look in the mirror, won't look in this mirror, and that's why I think to some degree we continue to have problems. But I think it's an incredibly well-made movie. I think Nate Parker is a very talented individual, filmmaker, and actor. Again, he did something that he made a movie about how wrong that was, and he should have realized. I mean, it's a complex situation in and out. So I just am commenting on the movie. I think it's excellent. I understand a lot of people won't be able to make themselves watch it for all the reasons that I listed, but really just the big two: Nate Parker scandal, and also how horrible the realization of what happened on American soil truly is. But at some point, I think you should force yourself to watch it because it's important. All right, so that's my review of The Birth of a Nation. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on it down below. I think there are some really great things that are revealed in the film, so I would ask you, if you're going to give away any spoilers, to do a spoiler warning before you divulge that information. All right, thank you for tuning in, and you can check out some more videos right now.